Hello and welcome. Today, Mark will be reviewing one of his holdings, Smurfit Westrock plc, née Smurfit Kappa, a company that continues to expand their market lead in the world of corrugated, e-commerce and retail packaging. Now, Smurfit is clearly a well-run business, and Mark runs through the figures in detail, but he also talks about how their success is in part attributable to a growing international consumer class, something which is reshaping the global economy and creating significant new market opportunities. So, if you're wondering what's in the box, stay tuned as we unwrap this, episode 41 of The Desert Island Investor. This episode of the podcast is generously hosted by Progressive Equity Research. Visit their website at progressive-research.com. Good afternoon, Mark.
And good afternoon to you, Paul.
Right. In a way, we have and have not covered this stock before, Smurfit.
Yes, Paul. We covered what was Smurfit Kappa back in August 2023. And the following month, it was announced that Smurfit would combine to form Smurfit Westrock, and this new entity came into being in July 2024 under the ticker symbol SWR.
Okay, and as well as London, it is also listed in the USA, I believe.
Yes, just to complicate matters a little, it's listed across the pond under the ticker SW.
All right, as usual, Mark those base numbers, please.
Well, the market cap is 13.4 billion. It's got a 4.4% yield. And that market cap compares with 8.4 billion when we last reviewed when it was Smurfit Kappa. So it's a much bigger concern now.
And in these intervening 2 years, Mark, have you either added or trimmed your holding?
I've done what I do best, which is nothing. The last time I added was in November 2022 into the old, again, Smurfit Kappa at £29.05. But nevertheless, it remains a key holding and it's sitting at number 8 in the portfolio. And in April, if I continue to hold, if we can combine the two companies together, it'll have been in the portfolio for 10 years.
Any particular reason that you haven't added?
A question of balancing the portfolio, what I perceive as more compelling value elsewhere. But with an acquisition or merger of this scale, it takes a lot of absorbing. And it's not just a little bolt-on business. This necessitates structural change. And it was very nearly a year since the announcement that the new entity came into being listed. And then we're just over a year since it came into being. So for me, it's still very early days, and I'll continue to sit back and observe for a little while yet.
On the 29th of October, Smurfit released their Q3 figures, and the market responded by marking the shares down nearly 11%.
Yes, this was heralded as a good fit between the two businesses, but inevitably there will be some overlap and collateral damage. And they've announced plant closures and that they'd be exiting certain less profitable business that you can call bottom trimming. And as I maintain, this will take some time, perhaps a couple of years to settle down. And you've got to throw in the human element. Smurfit and Westrock staff will probably be thinking what this means for me. And Smurfit people may have a new Westrock boss, and Westrock people might have a new Smurfit boss. And there'll be new expectations, new ways of working, and there's the anxiety, the unknown, and perhaps people having to reapply for jobs. And people take their eye off the ball and are concerned about the future rather than their day-to-day job.
And has there already been work done?
Yeah, they've closed 3 paper mills, 1 paper machine, and 18 converting facilities. And they announced they're on track to deliver $400 million of identified cost synergies. And the permanent headcount has been reduced by over 4,500. So on the downside for this as a business, it is labour and capital intensive.
Now, you've said before that you've been looking to increasingly invest in businesses that have exposure outside of the UK. So what is Smurfit's spread?
Uh, well, it's increasingly tough to make money in the UK, and Smurfit operate in 40 countries. They've got over 500 converting operations and 59 paper mills, and that's my background.
Okay, so we have discussed before, if you have geographical spread, it dilutes your exposure, but nevertheless, Smurfit did have a bad experience in Venezuela.
Yes, a country that's very much in the news, perhaps a classic example of the merits of a socialist government working in full vigour. In 2018, the Maduro government seized Smurfit's assets in the country, and I'm sure they know how to run that business effectively. Just look at the track record elsewhere. It's a case of where to start. I'm not aware of us having any subscribers in Venezuela. I would expect they'll be wondering where the next meal is coming from. That's a more pressing issue. But if we slow forward to the 28th of August 2024, it was announced that the World Bank's International Centre for Settlement and Investment Disputes issued an award granting Smurfit Holdings, which they said is a wholly owned subsidiary of Smurfit Westrock. They gave them compensation in excess of $468.7 million, plus legal costs of $4.5 million. Now, that's the award that's been granted. Now, my understanding is that Smurfit are still awaiting receipt of that payment from potless Venezuela. So, yeah, it could be a long way, and the check's in the post. So I could have contacted Kieran Potts, who's the investor relations manager, but I've tried to contact him before and he's never had a response. So all I am is I'm just a shareholder, Paul.
Right. Okay. Yeah, you might have to wait for that one. Okay. So on one hand, you're happy to sit on the touchlines and bide your time, and you're not tempted to add. But longer term, you remain pretty confident about the future for Smurfit.
Yeah, I think this is a classic desert island stock. I'm not sure where this business or industry will be in 18 months or 2 years. But if we're marooned for 10 years, I think it'll be a much larger concern.
And what gives you that confidence?
Well, there are two parts to investing. There's the numbers, the basic numbers that you look at, and then the story. And with this episode, I'd like us to concentrate very much on the story. And with corrugated, as I've said previously, it's got the twin tailwind, not just one, but two. It's the move away from plastic packaging and the growth of e-commerce. Now, I believe that corrugated is directly linked to the development of mankind. And as economies around the world develop, corrugated has to grow.
Now, you've drawn on your first-hand experience of your recent trip to Indonesia and Malaysia.
Yeah, on one hand, I spend limited time on research or working on the portfolio, but again, in almost equal value, it's what you observe, what you see around you in your everyday life, watching the world go by, and a sense of doing nothing but observing and reflecting and perhaps engaging in conversations. You're soaking in information like a sponge. And let's take Indonesia. When I went there, people are absolutely glued to their mobile phones. I thought I used mine a lot, but in Indonesia, just almost everybody's on it, and the usage that I've witnessed is unlike anywhere else. And Bali for Australians is pretty much what Spain is for us Brits. And I spoke to many Australians, and lots of them have been going repeatedly for many years, and they told me that back in the day, like in other less developed countries, they were constantly being hounded by taxi drivers, offers of massage, and hawkers. But with the mobile phone, this has subsided as these people are increasingly just preoccupied. Perhaps it's a positive, unforeseen circumstance, and people are sat around, they're texting, they're watching TikTok videos, or dare I say, possibly listening to the Desert Island Investor. But the mobile phone, it's more than a phone; it's a mini computer. A computer by which you can conduct transactions. And I spoke to many Indonesians, and they do shop online. And they said that there were things that they bought online, but there are other things that they like to buy physically. Look at them, touch them, perhaps, or even try them on. And that sounds pretty much like what happens in the UK. Yes, because they're following a well-trodden path, and they'll do the things that we do and have been doing.
Now, Smurfit have operations in Malaysia, but not in Indonesia.
Yeah, that's right. I'm using Indonesia as an example of a developing economy, and this is where the growth will increasingly, in my opinion, come from. And we've got to look beyond the stagnant UK and Europe. There's an enormous world out there that's rattling along at pace beyond what I would suggest most people comprehend. And according to McKinsey and Company, the average Indonesian spent 4 hours a day on their mobile device. Now, I've been there and seen it. That's twice what it is in the US. Now, 30 million Indonesians today are transacting online, and that's created a market value of at least $8 billion. And that market is expected to grow to 40 billion upwards in the next 5 years. And if they're buying online, it needs packaging in some way, including corrugated, and it just has to follow. And there are numerous projections for the Indonesian corrugated market. Just take a look for yourself. But I've picked a middling one, and this is from DataBridge Marketing Research, and they predict the CAGR for Indonesia between 2025 and 2032 will be 6.06%. So that's not shabby, but that's just looking into the immediate future. What could it be if this economy grows, and closes the gap with, what we experience in the West?
So you see a direct link between mobile phone take-up and the fortunes of the corrugated industry?
Yes, because I don't think I'm going off piste, but I want to reinforce the point that a lot of the people in the UK, certainly around my age, perhaps a bit younger, but most of the people, a lot of the people older, they seem to have an outdated view of the world, the world beyond our shores. I'm not making a political point, but it's in the news. If you take the Channel migrants, they're in the news daily. And I often hear people, again, around my age group, with incredulity, and they say, oh, they've all got designer gear and smartphones or mobile phones. And they seem to think that the mobile phone is a preserve of the UK citizen. Now, according to Digital around the world, a total of 6.04 billion people around the world will use the internet at the start of 2025. So that's equivalent to 73.2% of the world's population. So, even the Inuits, even they've got high mobile phone usage. You've probably got some guy at an ISO fishing, and his wife's ringing him up saying, how long are you going to be?
Yeah. Are you going to be much longer on that? All right. So, of course, although Indonesians are obviously buying products packaged in corrugated cardboard, that corrugated may not actually be sourced from the domestic market.
No, an electronic device, for example, will probably have the packaging from where the device was manufactured, probably China. But nevertheless, the argument is the same. World demand for corrugated will be fueled by those developing nations.
Right. Well, you're certainly advocating the fact that travel broadens the mind.
Well, it certainly opens your eyes.
Now, the second leg of your trip was to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. So what did you find out there?
Well, it's an amazing place, Paul. I've bored you with some of the videos and the photos, and this is called an advanced economy. They've got some of the tallest buildings in the world as a symbol, and they've got their Merdeka Tower, Menara, the Petronas Twin Towers. It's fantastic, especially at night. But even the stock exchange is an impressive building, but it's something of a step up currently from Indonesia. And Malaysia has a GDP per capita of $13,901, and that's compared to Indonesia at $5,074. Now, we stayed at the Verdant Hill Hotel, and they really looked after us there. We had a great time, and at the hotel there were lots of Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Sri Lankans, and a lot of Kenyans. But they weren't working in the hotel. They were guests, just like me, better dressed than me. That isn't difficult. But, they were there predominantly on their holidays.
Okay. Well, I see your point, but I'm pretty certain that not every Bangladeshi can afford to go on holiday, especially to somewhere like Kuala Lumpur. I mean, these are the wealthy Bangladeshis, aren't they? I mean, there will be many that probably spend their days making garments in a sweatshop.
Yeah, I fully agree, Paul. But I'm championing what's happening here around the world because what it does show is that there's a growing consumer class that will want the things that we have. And once in a day, your average Brit could not afford a foreign holiday. The Grand Tour again was the preserve of the privilege. Now, the hotel lift accommodated 17, but it was nearly full on one occasion with Elaine and I and two Kenyan ladies. Is it Kenyan or Kenyan? Anyway, and all their bags of shopping that they were laden with. It was pretty full. And on my encounters in Kuala Lumpur, I met with Tunisians, Algerians, Ghanans, Guyanans, Brazilians, and they've got money in their pocket. Money to buy things packaged in corrugated. And, on our flight to Doha, there are a number of people connecting to Rwanda. And that's had a lot of coverage because I know that was somewhere that the UK wanted to send asylum seekers, and it had a bad press. There were, on the plane, people were wearing "I love Kigali" hats and shirts, and "I love Rwanda," and they were going on their holidays there. And I was actually speaking to one traveller who sat next to me, and he was going there as the capacity as a promoter of a big MMA tournament. And he said to me, it's a fantastic place. He said you should have a look at it. Yeah, I think what the average person sees on television of what life is like in Africa, they think it's all of Africa. They see a starving child walking towards a stagnant pond for a charity advert. It's not the life that everybody has. And perhaps those images from Live Aid and Bob Geldof, was it back in 1987, they still linger on. Now, the UK's GDP per capita growth in 2024, according to the World Bank, was zero, right? So I'm just going to get a few comparisons, okay? Albania, 5.2%, Bangladesh, 3%, Belize, 6.6%, Benin, 4.8%, Brazil, 3%, Cambodia, 4.7%, Cape Verde, 6.8%, China, big one, 5.1%, Democratic Republic of Congo, 3.3%, Djibouti, 4.5%, Dominican Republic, 4.1%, Eritrea, 6.7%, Ethiopia, 4.6%, Ghana, 3.7%, and Guyana, listen to this one, 42.6%. Now, they've opened up their oil reserves, so I think their people are probably not great fans of net zero. They probably think this is absolutely fantastic, and it must be exciting times in that part of the world. And then you've got India at 5.5%, Indonesia, where I've been to, 4.2%. So I could keep working my way through alphabetically, but you get the picture. Yeah, lots of these are starting from a low base, but they're all galloping along and catching us up, which I think is a really positive thing. They're creating consumers who can buy things and, importantly, have better lives. And I think we're in denial of our gradually diminishing position in the world. Now, when I was in Kuala Lumpur, I was speaking to a major player in the palm oil sector, and I asked what he thought about the EU's influencer interference, given that palm oil is something that's not sourced within the EU. And he said to me, I think the EU is under the illusion that it still calls all the shots. And that told me a lot. Now, and I just got some statistics here on the EU so in 1960, the EU percentage of global GDP in 1960 was 28% of the 27 countries in the EU. Now, in 2022, it was only 16.5%. So that's declining, and the rest of the world's catching up. So the role of the West or Europe is slowly declining, but I think in many ways, it's a positive. And despite us trying to overcompensate in certain areas, by giving aid to countries with space programs and nuclear capability, being major players in international conflicts, or leading on net zero, which, we seem to be leading on it, but nobody's pretty much interested in following us.
Okay, you've made the case for emerging markets. So what about the more mature markets?
Well, probably there's some more to come, but a slower pace. And, the UK has been one of the leaders in e-commerce, and we still have the generation like my dear, beloved 87-year-old mum. She doesn't have the internet, and it's all a bit of a mystery to her. But eventually that generation will be replaced by the new old gimmers, Paul, like you and I. But I keep hearing about regenerating the high street, and this must have been going on for 2 or 3 decades. It's gone. It's gone, and it's not coming back. And, we must be at peak eatery now. And in terms of physical stuff, clothes perhaps being a slight exception, it's mainly online. And I've said before, I like shopping online, I prefer it. I buy the things I need rather than I want. And, going into town, it's not something I want to do with my spare time. You're driving, you're paying for parking, you get your car potentially broken into. That's happened to me once. You're traipsing around, getting wet, queuing, told they have no stock. If it's faulty, you've got to repeat the whole process. I have the luxury of time, but for, a time poor worker, going into town to pick up a single item could take up a Saturday morning, and generally you have to pay a premium in the process.
Okay, well, give us a couple of examples of recent purchases and packaging then.
Well, I'm not your typical shopper, am I? The things. So I do have a nice dress watch. Not the
Not a nice dress.
Yeah, not a nice. Yeah, well, only at the weekends, Paul.
All
But
right.
not the type that people are being mugged for. Not yet, anyway. But 95% of the time, I wear a Casio. And I got it years ago. I think it cost about £25. And I was on business down in Derby, and I went into H. Samuel, and he just said, "What are your cheapest watches?" It's what I call a playing out watch. It doesn't matter if it gets scratched or in the garden. I'm going on a run or anything like that. And just as an aside, they asked me if I wanted to take out extended warranty. I said, "What, on a watch that cost?" And what was it? Either £20 or £25. And anyway, just the loop on the strap had gone, and it was just flapping around a bit. Anyway, I was in Chorlton, which is where you used to live, and I popped into the Timpsons. I thought, I said, "Have I got a strap?" Yeah, and he said, it'd be £20, I said, "Well, I only paid about £25, for the watch." So I thought, I'm not going to pay that. So I know I'm tight, aren't I? But I had to wait a little time. But I got one from Amazon, £2 and 2p, and that came all the way from Bratislava.
Yes, and somebody who has a watch strap fitting kit
Yes, thank you, Paul.
fitted the strap for nothing.
Yeah. I mean, people in the restaurant were giving us a funny look as you were getting out your magnifying glass and doing your as long as you didn't, drop it. But it's working. It's working. Thanks. So thanks for your handiwork. And perhaps you can put something in the notes later on of any kind of watch repairs or strap repairs that you've got you can do a gig for them. But that came in a bubble envelope. Not much damage you can do with a watch strap. But I've also ordered it's your recommendation, a JBL Go 4 Ultra Portable Smooth speaker. And
Bluetooth speaker.
Yeah, it's that Bluetooth speaker. Yeah, it's helped me hear the volume better on the laptop. Getting to the age now where my hearing must be going, and I can hear that from some distance away. And as expected, that came in a corrugated box because it's breakable. And just got a new food mixer as well, and that came in a big outer brown corrugated box, and within that another corrugated box with the the picture of the food mixer on. So these are just like everybody, typical things that you can get online. And I don't want to go traveling and going around and queuing and all that kind of process. You get it next day, sometimes same day.
When you buy your new grandson presents, you're going to be more excited about showing him what kind of box the toy came in than the actual toy.
He'll probably play with the corrugated box more, Paul.
Yeah, I used to do that. Apparently, I've been reminded that I did that once because the box was so cool. Anyway, right. So, second tailwind then to assist with the situation regarding corrugated is the large switch from plastic to paper.
Yeah, lots of it is occurring, and more to come. And with plastic and packaging in general, there's been a lot of reduction, but we see replacement of plastic with paper. And just take in what you can see around your local supermarket, and which is hopefully a Tesco. Plastic punnets have been replaced with paper. You look at the Barilla pasta brand. It had a plastic film window where you could see the pasta inside, and that now, just it's a cardboard box where the pasta's printed on the front. And then you've got things like cans of beer with those plastic 6 rings. They've been replaced with paper. It's a product Smurfit produced called Top Clip or Green Clip. And again, these are a few examples, but the tonnage is enormous.
Right. Okay. Looking very positive. We are just about out of time, really. So thanks very much for your review, Mark. But I am conscious, I'll have to say, that in this episode, we haven't actually talked that much about Smurfit Westrock, have we?
Exactly, Paul. I think the fortunes of Smurfit rely less on what Smurfit does and more on what the world does. The world continues on this trajectory. Then my opinion is that Smurfit Westrock has to succeed. Otherwise, it'd be a classic defeat grabbed from the jaws of victory. And according to Statista Global e-commerce revenue between 2025 and 2030 will grow at a compound annual growth rate of 6.29%. So one day in Mali, somebody will be ordering that Casio watch strap for themselves, that audio booster, or even the food mixer.
Right. Okay. Well, I hope they find somebody to fit it for free. Thank you very much indeed, Mark, for that review of Smurfit Westrock. Well, that's all for this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it. Please remember the content is for information only and it is not financial advice. If you have a question for Mark for our Question in a Bottle podcast, just complete the form on our website, thedesertislandinvestor.co.uk. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.